Welcome back, everyone. I am the Nazarene Catholic, and I have a very special guest with me today. I have Dan Gonzalez, who is the author of an upcoming book titled Mass Explained, which, if you haven't heard of it, definitely check it out. Currently, there is a Kickstarter page listed where you can get more information and also support this project, which I highly recommend. We're going to be talking about that during this video. And at the time of this recording, the Kickstarter has been up for a while. There's, I believe, 15 days left. It's currently February 15th, day after Ash Wednesday. And just for clarification, the Kickstarter is not to raise support for the research or development of this. The book is already done. He just needs to raise money for printing and distribution. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But
100%
is
right.
there Yeah, so is there anything about the Kickstarter campaign you want to share with us? I guess we'll just go ahead and jump right into that.
Sure. Sure. The Kickstarter campaign the main purpose of the Kickstarter campaign is to get funding for printing. Like you said, the book is already complete. It was designed over the course of 30 years. I started it while I was in college, and we'll get into that a little later. It was presented to my Archbishop, who gave it a Nihil Obstat and an imprimatur, so I'm not saying anything crazy in here. It was presented to the USCCB and to ISIL, which is the International Commission of English in the Liturgy. Since I use quotations from the General Instruction of the Roman Missal, the Order of Mass, the Catechism, I have to get their approval in order to use those quotes, and I have to pay a stipend in order to use their texts. That's something that they're clamping down on quite a bit, of authors just quoting from all of these documents without getting their approval, because they don't know what you're using this for, what type of message you're putting out there, and they want to make sure that what you're saying is in line with the magisterium. But as far as the Kickstarter campaign, when I finished the book, I presented it to a publisher, but the publisher, and I'm pretty sure that this is a generic contract that they sent out to most of their authors. It said that they have artistic control over the book, that they can make any type of decision that they want regarding the artwork, regarding the printing of it, regarding anything regarding how it's advertised. And for me, the book, it's almost as important as the text is the way that the book looks.
Hmm.
I want it to appear a certain way. There's a certain font that I wanted to use. There's a certain type size that I wanted to use. I know that some people that read these types of books skew a little bit older, so I wanted the font to be a certain size. It's full color from front to back. So a publisher would rightfully have an eye on profits, on bottom line, on how can they, you know, not cheap, but how they can get the most bang for their buck. So they might say, "Oh, this is a beautiful book, but we want to print it in black and white because it's gonna save some money, and it might be more profitable for us that way." Or we might just print it without any pictures and just put your text. The contract would allow them to do that, and I did not want to change the book in any way, because I was designing the book as I was writing the book, and sometimes the image completes the thought, and I wouldn't want someone without that type of background or understanding of the book to start making these design decisions. So I kept it, publishing it myself, producing it myself. I found a printer, and now the Kickstarter is just to raise funds for printing. It's already printed. In fact, in my hand, I have an advanced copy from the printer. So it's not vaporware. It's not something that's a pie in the sky. It's actual, with your background, you might, yeah. It's real deal. I have it in my hands, and it's just to raise funds for printing, and that's what the Kickstarter is. And the Kickstarter is you're pre-ordering the book.
Hmm.
It's not like Amazon Prime that you put your order tonight and tomorrow morning it'll be on your doorstep. The book hasn't been printed yet. That's the
Hmm.
reason why I'm doing the Kickstarter, is to generate funds in order to print the book. Fortunately, we already hit the target. So it's definitely going to press, but we have about 15 more days before the Kickstarter campaign ends. So it's just a matter of trying to generate as much funding as I can, because the more that you buy, the cheaper the unit cost is per book. So I can get more books out there, let more people know about the Mass, and yeah, about 15 more days left on that.
Wow. Yeah, and
So
congratulations on making just over double what your original goal was. And
yeah,
you hit that original goal pretty quick, didn't you?
25 hours in just over one day.
Wow.
I was letting, we were talking before about cultivating an audience. I wanted to keep everything very transparent with the people that had signed up to follow this project before we went live on February 1st. So I was keeping them aware of what's happening. What does the back end of Kickstarter look like? Um, what happens when I press this green button? I made this thing about the green button that's being pressed on February 1st at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Mhm.
One of the email communications I had a countdown counter counting down to that day. So I was trying to generate a little bit of a buzz behind the launch of the Kickstarter campaign, and that was successful because people, I already brought along my audience in order to be as effective as we can on the first day,
Mm.
because Kickstarter um, promotes books and projects that have momentum right from the beginning. So the more buzz you have, the more momentum you has, and the more that they're gonna, you know, advertise it on different sites and internally and externally. So that's what I wanted to do, is to have as many people on the ready from February 1st to buy the book in order to generate that momentum. If you would have just waited before doing my research on Kickstarter, I thought that it was just, oh, just launch it and people come. That's what happens on Kickstarter. All you hear is the success stories on Kickstarters. You don't hear that more than half of them don't hit their target and they fail miserably. So
Yeah, very true.
that's the part that you don't hear. You just hear, oh yeah, you just open up a Kickstarter and people start throwing money at you. It's not like that at all. So it's been a lot of hard work. I mean, the book was hard work, but the Kickstarter is really hard work.
Mhm.
Cultivating the audience, getting all of your organic ads and social ads and paid social and organic social, and contacting newspapers and contacting other
Mm.
authors. Patrick Madrid and Mike Acolina um, gave they're on the back cover of the book. Gave some endorsements for the book.
Wow.
Getting all these things in line is quite exhausting.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it's clear you've put a lot of work into this. Very much so. Before we get more into the book, could you share with us? Sorry, could you share with us a little bit about your upbringing and your background, and
Sure,
sort of what led you to this project?
sure. I was calling you from Miami, Florida, which is where I was born and raised. My
Mm.
parents are Cuban. They left Cuba in the 1960s because this guy named Fidel Castro came in and he said, "Surprise, I'm communist."
Mm.
And my parents said, I don't think this is not looking good." So they came over to Miami, and I was born, and my brother was born, and my mom would take us to church. She would take us on Saturday because on Sunday for me it was a sacred day. I had
Mhm.
Dolphins football, and that was my religion. Dan Marino was my lowercase g god, and I had to worship at his altar. So I
Mm.
did not want to go to church on Sunday. So we went to the vigil mass on Saturday, and I really wasn't too interested in my faith as a kid. It was more so out of cultural obligation than religious conviction.
Mm.
So uh, fast forwarding a few years, I went to a design high school, an art high school. I always had an artistic background, an artistic interest, and I went to school up in Providence, Rhode Island School of Design.
Oh wow.
And I went across the street from RISD, which was what they call the school, is Brown University, and at Brown University they have a chapel. And I promised my mom I will go to mass every Sunday. Don't worry about it. So I would go to mass every Sunday, no problem. Again, I wasn't really. I knew what to say and when to kneel and when to stand, but I really was. It was just going through the motions because I wanted to make my mom happy that I was still going to mass
Mm.
while I was in college. Uh, but I'm from a somewhat conservative background, and when you go to an art school, it's anything but conservative.
Mm.
And there was very strange people at the time, with before it was commonplace to have piercings on your eyelids and on your nose, and the green mohawks and the shaved heads and the tattoos on the face tattoos. This was in the 1990s, so it was
Oh
really
yeah.
shocking for me. This kid coming from Miami, from Cuban parents, very sheltered. It was
Mm.
very strange to me. So I saw that there was I saw a poster that said Bible study, upper refectory, 7 p.m. Be there.
Mm.
So when I went, I said, let me go because I think the people that might go to this Bible study would be a little bit more. looking like me than
Hmm.
with green hair and piercings and all these things. So I was right. I went there and I became friends with the main guy, the leader. Um, and he was in the same major that I was, but he was 1 year ahead. So he became to me like my brother. I would He would talk to me about the teachers. He'd talk to me about the projects and the assignments. He said, okay, when you do this assignment for this teacher, use charcoal, don't use a watercolor, because he prefers charcoal over watercolor. Say this word when you're critiquing this piece, because he thinks that you're smart if you say that word. And so it, he became closer to me than my brother. And then
Hmm.
one day he said, hey, why don't you come to my church, my non-denominational church? I said, of course, no problem. It's Jesus is Jesus. It doesn't matter whether you're going to a Catholic church or you're going to a non-denominational church. It's all Jesus. It's all good. It's just like, you know, one person likes vanilla, the other one likes chocolate, but everybody loves ice cream, so it really doesn't matter. So I started going to his church. I was there for 6 months, and I know that you were studying, to be a minister, right?
Mhm.
So uh, when you would go, and I would go, and the pastor would deliver his sermon, that was it. Go home. It's over. Go have
Hmm.
your donuts, get in your car, and go home. And I just kept on feeling that something was missing.
Hmm.
Come to find out that what was missing was the Eucharist.
Hmm.
I didn't feel complete when I was going to his church. So I told him, I said, look, I appreciate, I still want to come to the Bible study and all that, but I'm going to go back to mass at the chapel. And I remember we were, in the schoolyard there, and he says, "Look, you can't do that." I'm like, "Well, why?" And he says, "Well, if you do, you're anathema." And at the time, I had no idea what that meant. This was before iPhones and before anything else. So I went to go look what anathema meant. It means damned to hell.
Hmm.
So I know that I heard your interview, and you said that you didn't experience much of that anti-Catholic
Hmm.
sentiment, but this was very strongly
Oh yeah.
anti-Catholic. And he said, if you go back to mass, that's a demonic thing. It was made by man to keep men from God. You're spitting at Jesus in the face, because
Hmm.
you're saying that his sacrifice on Calvary was insufficient. That you have to re-crucify him in the mass in order to atone for sins. So you're saying that he was inadequate. So if you go to mass, you're going to hell. Your family's going to hell. All
Oh
Catholics are
wow.
going to hell.
Hmm.
So I had a spiritual crisis because he was my brother. I
Yeah.
didn't know anyone else in Rhode Island. He was my guy. So I came home and I was distraught for a while. And in the cartoons, when you see a person like in the forest, and then there's a fork in the road, and you either go this way or you go that way, and you
Hmm.
have to make a decision, because that decision is going to impact the rest of your life. And do I go and become Protestant, and I shun religion, and I trust him that he has my best interest at heart, or do I follow what I feel inside, that I need to go back to mass? And
Hmm.
obviously I said, no, I have to go back to mass. And I said to myself, this mass thing is so divisive that it has cost me my best friend.
Hmm.
I need to know everything I can about this mass. So that's what started there in 1993. I started
Wow.
researching as much as I could about the mass, reading book after book on the mass, trying to understand it. I talked to the priest there at the chapel. I said, "Can you please talk to me about this mass? What's happening here?" I knew, from CCD, I did all my, in confirmation, but our catechetical formation ends when we do our confirmation. There's
Hmm.
nothing for you until you get married, unless you look for it. It's there in the parishes, but you have to look for it. No, they're not coming for you.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what started my love affair with the mass. I
Hmm.
started just reading book after book, like, wow, we really believe that. Oh my goodness, this is fantastic. Oh, this prayer came from this saint, and this, it's just your eyes just started watering at how
Hmm.
beautiful the mass is.
Hmm.
And so I just kept on, learning about the mass on my own. And at the same time, when I graduated, I came back to Miami, enrolled at St. Thomas University, and took all sorts of scripture classes, liturgy classes. Um, they have a bunch of lay ministry programs down here, and all while reading my own liturgy books on my own time, and just writing Mass Explained.
Hmm.
And then it ended in 2023. So from
Wow.
1993 to 2023. This book has seen me get married, the birth of my two kids. It's been with me. It's literally my baby.
Yeah. So, how does it feel to be at this place now with this book that you've spent, so much of your life working on, and now it's out there?
Yeah.
What is that like? I mean,
Relief.
because it's not just like your own personal thing. Now, like now it's out there for even like public scrutiny.
Yes, it's very intimidating. Well, first of all,
Hmm.
it's a relief. It's almost like God. I don't want to say burdened me with this, but he put this on me and said, "You got to do this. This is why I gave you
Hmm.
your talent. This is why I gave you your ability to design. This is why I gave you your ability to write, to put a couple words together. This is why you know about art and paintings and sculptures and Michelangelo and the Pietà and Duccio and all these things. You know all these things, so you can write this book."
Hmm.
So now I'm like, okay, God, I finished it. So it's a relief. Like he put this on me. He pressed me into service, and I've completed. Like St. Paul, I've run the race. I'm good. I know I've completed your assignment. But
Hmm.
now it's out for the world to see, and no one. I mean, people have read it, but there has been no critical exposition on the book, whether it's good or not. It was very scary for me to press that button on February 1st to launch the
Hmm.
Kickstarter campaign, because imagining you're preparing for a party for 30 years and not wondering if anyone's going to show up to your party.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
glad that people showed up, but
Yeah,
it
they
was
certainly
very
did.
scary. When I pressed the
Hmm.
button, I said, okay, now what happens? Does confetti come from the ceiling, or and then the first sale came in. I'm like, okay, good. Okay, at least I have one. At least one person came to my party. Then another sale came in. Then another came in. I took that day off from. I don't do this, full time. I
Mhm.
work at a cruise line, doing design for a cruise line, and I took that day off from work, and then the sales just kept on coming in and coming in, and then um, on the following day at 10 o'clock is when we reached the campaign goal.
Hmm.
That the campaign goal is not the full amount of the printing, but it's just what will bridge the gap between what I'm going to put in and the full price of the printing. There's no
Hmm.
way you can't get this book printed for that amount.
Right.
So I'm putting in much more than what the campaign is worth, but at least that'll get me to where we need to be in order to print the book.
Yeah. Wow. So with the book itself, because you had mentioned like your background in graphic design, and I had read some books related to the mass just because I'm curious about it too. And attended the mass. It seems like there's all these elements going on, a lot of stuff that most people aren't aware of. But what makes your book so unique is that a lot of those books are just text based, which is fine. But for someone like me, what made me excited about the project is how visual it all is. And so I love how you took your background and your interest and how that really developed in just using your gift, like how you said, in your own love of the mass, using what you're already talented at, what you're already gifted at, and using that to communicate to other people what the mass is like.
Yeah,
So,
seeing
yeah.
is believing, and I think
Mm.
that the book has a combination of photographs of the mass, up close, that I paid a photographer from the Arkansas Catholic to put together a photo shoot,
Hmm.
with a priest and a deacon and altar servers, and he got right up close on the altar to the epiclesis and all the different parts of the mass. He
Wow.
was able to shoot them up close, which during a regular mass would be very obtrusive to have a photographer standing in front of the altar.
Right.
So he got that done. So there's been like about 5 different shoots of
Hmm.
masses, and then there's images of paintings and sculptures, that are over 100 years old, so they're in public domain.
Hmm.
Then there's also stock photography of different archaeological sites of basilicas, of all sorts of things that uh, you know that are available online for purchase from different stock agencies. So there's a lot of imagery in the book, and sometimes it was very hard to get certain images because, for example, there was one image that I found online of the offertory of some ladies bringing up the gifts uh,
Hmm.
during the mass, and I wanted to use that image, and there was 3 ladies that were visible. So I saw the image and I found out who the photographer was. So I called the photographer and I said, "Hey, can I use this image?" And he said, "Of course, but you need to get obviously permission of the 3 ladies. You can't just willy nilly grab a picture and put it in a book without getting a release form, a model release
Right.
form from the three ladies pictured. So I found out that the picture was taken during the ordination of three priests.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, three deacons, and those were the wives of the deacons. So I was able to contact the deacon, and then I would explain to him, "Hey, I'm doing this project, this book." Then he would ask me, "Okay, so it, who are you?" So I had to give him a pedigree and tell him about the Neil Obstat and the imprimatur. I'm okay, and he said, "Can I please? Do you have any information on these three ladies?" Then he would say, "Okay, here's my wife's email. You can talk to her." And then I'd have to get the second wife and then get that email with that deacon and then do the third wife and then do that. Then I
Oh
would have to
wow.
talk to the wives and say, okay, I'm doing this right. Well, who are you? Well, so you had to start the thing and to finally get a signed release form. But if any three of them would say, you know what, I'd rather not be in your book. That's it. Go
Yeah.
find another picture. And I did
Hmm.
that. There's over 1,180 images in the book, and I did that for at least 200 of the pictures. Is just trying to track down people to get forms
Wow.
signed from them, because I love the images so much.
Hmm.
Miami is a very young diocese relative to what you have in Boston and what you have in other places.
Hmm.
So we have a cathedral. It's beautiful, but there's some things that are in Boston that are just gorgeous, and I love that grand scale and
Hmm.
so I had to rely on other photographers and that have access to other places other than my own archdiocese, which has been fantastic. I mean,
Hmm.
my archbishop obviously looked at the book and gave it his approval.
Yeah. Geez, that sounds like a lot of work, and a lot of work that people probably don't even, think of. They'll look through the book, they'll see a picture, not even knowing how much went into it. And of course, when you start considering that, it sort of makes sense why it took one person 30 years to,
Right.
to put all this together.
Yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
it was that. A lot of it was finding images. Like, I would see something. I said, you know what? I would design it and then just leave a big gray square saying, "I need a picture to go here." Then I
Hmm.
would get online and just type in the words and do an image search and try to look through all the different sites. And there was a lot of archdiocesan newspapers that put their photos online, and I would
Hmm.
drop them in just to see if it would look right, if the scale was right, if the coloring was right. Because each page, you try to balance the colors so you don't have one image that's really red with another image that has a lot of green to it. It just
Hmm.
doesn't look right. So I tried to have the color palette on of the images on the spread look work well together. So then you would call the newspaper. Some newspaper would say, no, I'm sorry, we can't, we don't give out our pictures. They're only used for editorial purposes for our newspapers. We don't sell them for any other purpose. So you know sorry. And then I'd have
Hmm.
to try again, find another picture. And many times it's happened that, there's a picture that has five people. I was able to track down three of them. I couldn't track down the other two. Can't use it.
Hmm.
So yeah, there
Wow.
was a lot of that happening.
Yeah. And so you even did like the layout of each page yourself. So it's not like you put like the
Correct.
information together and said, "Oh, here's another designer who will do the page and here's sort of how I want to look, but you do the rest." I mean, you really did everything for this book. And we were talking beforehand, and it wasn't just like the layout of the book. And even now I'm learning like even just layout of the pages, but you even were invested in the pages and the binding and all of that yourself too as well. Is that correct?
Yes, there's people can cut corners with printing. They can get paper that's really thin. They can use perfect binding, which means that the pages are just glued up. So eventually, over time, and I'm sure you've had books that once you crack open the spine, eventually individual pages start falling out, because
Hmm.
that's called perfect binding, meaning that they've only been glued together, but they haven't been sewn together.
Oh.
So the pages over time, over a few years, they'll start falling out. Um, I looked at this book as an offering,
Hmm.
in the biblical sense of an offering. Like the first fruits offerings was the best you can do. The lamb was an unblemished lamb. It wasn't a lamb that it's kind of has a gimpy leg and it's not perfect. So let's get rid of that. Let's offer that one to God. I tried my best. This is the best that I can do, not only
Hmm.
in my time and the talent that He gave me that I'm giving back to Him, but in the materials. It's a fantastic paper. It's thick enough that since there's a lot of coverage on the papers, you might have one picture and on the other side is another picture. And if the paper is too thin, you'll have an onion skinning, so you'll see through it and you'll see the bleed through, and it kind of doesn't look that great. So it's a really high quality matte art paper that and it has a hard finish to it, which means that the ink rests on the surface. It's not sucked into the paper, which dulls out the
Hmm.
uh, the colors. It makes it less vibrant. But when the ink stays on the surface, it's much more intense. Has a much more intense color. The blues and the greens are much more vivid, and it pops more. And that's what I wanted for all of the these fantastic paintings that are 100, 200, 300, 500 years old. I wanted you to get sucked in. We had talked about the idea of beauty. Um, Bishop Barron talks about using beauty as an evangelical tool.
Hmm.
That you show someone something beautiful, and then after they succumb to the beauty, then you can challenge them with the truth. You don't start with truth. You don't start with Aquinas. That's too much. You start with something beautiful, something universal. Something that's amazing to me about paintings is that there's no words. Somebody from Argentina or from Yugoslavia or from Russia or from Miami can see a painting and they can connect to it without
Hmm.
having to be for it to be translated or to understand what's going on. You can just fall to tears looking at Michelangelo's Pietà.
Hmm.
The universal idea of a mother suffering her dead child in her lap. It's just it tears at your heartstrings. And then once you fall in love with the beauty, then you can start understanding the truth behind the beauty. And that's what I wanted to do with this book. I can't show it to you on. I don't think it'll get it. But there's a oh there I saw there's a gloss on certain items there on the.
Hmm.
I wanted to pull out as much uh, pull out all the stops. The
Hmm.
binding is it's a sewn binding. The paper is top notch. The cover is a very thick cover. I wanted it to be hardcover, but that was just going to be too prohibitively expensive. It would be
Oh,
too
sure.
heavy, and just it couldn't be done. So,
Hmm.
but it's a it's a hefty hardcover book, and it's my sacrifice. I sacrificed 30 years of my life, and I wanted it to just be beautiful,
Yeah.
and that's part of the reason why I didn't want to turn it over to a publisher who didn't see it. They might have, but they might not. They might not have
Hmm.
seen it as something as a sacrifice. They might have seen it as profits. How can we, reduce the page count? How about we get rid of half the images? How about if we print it in black and white? How about we don't print images at all and just extract the text? you
Hmm.
know that would have killed me. That's 30 years of my life, and I didn't want to relinquish that control. So that's why I'm going through Kickstarter, as opposed to handing this over to a traditional Catholic publisher and having them bring the book to life.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm glad you didn't go through a publisher then, because uh, so because I certainly, I want to see this succeed. I hope other people want to see this succeed as well, and obviously other people do because you've been able to raise so much, and I hope you can raise even more. Because I mean, the work itself just looks beautiful. Even when you're just flipping through the pages on the camera, I'm just shocked, and I supported it myself. I'm excited to get my hands on it at some point, um, because you're right. Yeah, things that are beautiful just draw us in. Which a little bit of my story. I know people who watch my channel are probably already familiar with this. But when it came to the Catholic Mass, when I first attended Mass, I didn't really know anything that was going on. But one of the things that kept me interested was a lot of the beauty of it, and in particular, a lot of the imagery. So, like after I converted, I had some friends who were still Protestant just walk into a Catholic church with me. I was just showing them around, and one of them said that they just loved being in there because it seems like everything is intentional, like from just all the imagery around, the way things are positioned, the way everything's set up. And because of all the research you've done, you could probably speak into this a little bit more than I can for sure. But does that seem to be the case, that when it comes to the mass, and in particular the symbols and the imagery and the things that you focus on in your book that people can actually see, does that seem to be the case, that it is very intentional? There's a reason things are done a certain way. There's a reason things look a certain way, or is it just sort of whatever looks good?
Hardly whatever looks good. It does look good, but it's very intentional. Everything from the moment that you stand up and you start intoning the entrance chant, from the entrance procession, you have the thurifer with the incense from the book of Revelations. Let incense rise to the heavens.
Hmm.
You have the processional cross. You have a crucifer holding the processional cross. It's either gold or some kind of beautiful cross. You have behind him the deacon holding, marching with the book of the Gospels. So right there, you have the sacrifice of the cross, and you have the God's word right there. You're getting a glimpse of the entire mass just in
Hmm.
the entrance procession. And then you have the celebrant coming in at the end, and that's who we're standing up for. He is in persona Christi among us. He is the celebrant. So it's very intentional. The way that it's broken up into the liturgy of the Word and the liturgy of the Eucharist, it's very intentional. Everything in the Mass has a meaning and has a purpose and has a reason for being where it is. The most innocuous thing, the announcements, that
Hmm.
just seems something arbitrary. It's not. You've gone through this whole ritual. You've been fed with His word. You've been nourished with His body and blood. And now it's time for you to put this into action. Here's a list of things that we're doing. Go clothe the naked. Go feed the hungry. These are all the things that you can do to put your faith into action. That's what the announcements are for, and that's why they're not put after mass. They're part of the mass. It comes before the final blessing. So everything in the mass is at a certain spot on purpose. You stand for a certain purpose. You kneel at a certain time for a certain purpose. It's everything is very intentional. Everything has its place. Everything has its history, and nothing comes to chance. It's not happenstance.
Yeah, well, man, that's what I'm so excited for with this book. Because those are the things that I love, the things that people see, but stuff that's not really said or explained. If I could put it that way, the type of thing that's difficult to just write about. Because yeah, it's I feel like I'm being redundant, but it's a lot of that imagery again, which is
Sure.
what makes your book so unique. And I love how intentional you've been in setting it all up and making sure that it looks good. You're using good photos. It's not just cheap, paper that's not going to look that good. Even that everything's just going to be really well done. And and I don't know if this is part of your purpose for it, but with that quote from uh, I believe it was Bishop Barron, you said correct. That in that way, just the beauty of it is drawing to people. It's
Sure.
evangelical.
Yeah. It is an evangelical tool, and in studying the mass, you start, at least, anyways. I'm fascinated by certain books. There's a book that I have here. I don't know if you know this series of books called the DK books.
Hmm.
That they're very visual on the inside, and I kind of modeled my book after these books. They're
Oh,
more famous for travel books, like the DK travel books are very popular. Um, they have cutaways of cathedrals, and when you go to Paris, you buy the Paris travel book, and it shows you, Notre Dame, a cut through, showing all the different things. So I kind of patterned it after that, and as you're going along, you pick up all these little tidbits, these, I guess you call them fun facts on the mass. I'm like, wow, that's so interesting. And I didn't want to discard them if I couldn't fit them in somehow. So
hmm.
in the book on the outside, let me show you, like it has these sidebars, for example. See if you can see these sidebars here, where I
Oh
put
yeah.
all of these it's ancillary information. You can read
Hmm.
the whole book without reading anything on the sidebar. I don't. I'd prefer if you did. It took some time to do it, so I would prefer if you read those sidebars. But I would tuck little tidbits of information on the side that aren't necessary, but are interesting to know. One of them was, uh, I was reading about making the sign of the cross
Hmm.
as a celebrant. um, Once the first words that he says when he enters into the sanctuary is in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, before he does anything else, before he
Hmm.
welcomes the parishioners, before he says anything, it's in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And I was doing some research on that, and as you know, we make the sign of the cross up, down, then left and right.
Hmm.
But in the Orthodox Church, they go up, down, then right and left. The
Hmm.
last two motions are opposed one to another. And I was researching that, trying to figure out, and there's a whole bunch of different explanations that you sanctify your arms as a way of blessing your work, the work of your hands, and different things. One explanation, not an explanation of it, but the origin of a certain phrase was that in Venice is on in Italy is on the cusp between the Western Church and the Eastern Church, and it seems like Venetian merchants in the Middle Ages, they wanted to ingratiate themselves to certain patrons that they were dealing with. So if they saw that they were going to be dealing with Western patrons, they would, make the sign of the cross like they would, and
Hmm.
say, "Hey, I'm one of you guys. That's I can give you a bargain on these tapestries here." But if he was going to deal with an Eastern person, he would make the sign of the cross the other way, and he would say, "Hey, I got this deal for you. I'm one of you guys."
Huh.
And that's the origin of the word a double crosser, somebody that claims to be with one person, but in actuality they're part of somebody else. So
Ah.
and the book has all of these little fun facts that you would never
Yeah.
know otherwise. Like
Hmm.
in the consecration, when the mass was said in Latin, the words of consecration are "Hoc est corpus meum." This is my body, which was said in Latin. And it seems like because of either poor catechesis or poor acoustics, people couldn't understand what the priest was saying when he would say "Hoc est corpus meum." This is my body. So they thought it was some type of incantation, that he was saying something that would magically change things, and that's where we got the hocus pocus from. So it
Huh.
was things that you know. There's just so many of those types of things that you're like, wow, that's where that came from. That came from the mass. Oh, that came from the liturgy. Oh, that came from this prayer in the mass. And
Hmm.
there's just so many of them that it's mind boggling.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely going to be reading all those. So I can already tell you I'll be reading them at least because
Okay,
those
good.
are the type
I
of
have
things that
one person
fascinate
at the
me.
party now. Fantastic.
Yeah. So in dealing with the mass, and so that you talked about, difference between East and West, is there a particular form of the mass that you explore in this book, or is it exploring all forms of the mass from the different rites, or just what does that look like in the book?
Mhm. The book starts from the entrance chant all the way to the end of the
Hmm.
Novus Ordo, which is the ordinary form of the mass, which is the most popular form of the Western Rite. It often makes reference to the Latin Mass, to the Tridentine Mass. It compares the prayers. It's very respectful to the Latin Mass. It honors it extensively.
Hmm.
Um, but it does cover the new Mass, the Novus Ordo.
Okay. Is
There's
there a
different rites.
particular? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
There's also, the book also makes reference to other rites, like when the church in the early church started, disseminating, there was these centers of liturgy, like in Jerusalem, Antioch, Rome, Alexandria, Constantinople, and they developed their own way of celebrating the Eucharist. And that's where you get all of these different rites from, like the Byzantine rite, the Mozarabic rite, all of these different rites. And you have the Western rite, which, the Western Church, and that's where we have the Tridentine, the Latin Mass, and we also have the Novus Ordo.
Hmm.
So this book covers the Novus Ordo, but it frequently, very frequently, references the Latin Mass.
Hmm. Is there a particular reason why you focused on the Novus Ordo form?
Because it's the most common form of mass. It's the one that I grew up with. I grew up in the 1970s, which is brought on the tail end of Vatican II.
Hmm.
And that's when it was brought out. I don't remember. I've been to Latin mass several times as an adult, but as a child, I don't remember the mass being in Latin because I was just born on the cusp. I was born in 71, and it was 69, 71, around there, 73, that the Novus Ordo was being promulgated.
Hmm.
Uh, so I have no recollection at all of it being in Latin. So it's my mass. This is the Novus Ordo is my mass. Um, but I totally see the Tridentine Mass, the traditional Latin Mass. I've been to quite a few of them. Yes, it's extremely reverent. It's different. Yeah, obviously, you kneel for communion. The priest puts it on your tongue as you're kneeling at a communion rail. They don't put it in the hands. You see the women wearing veils, mantillas, over their hair. It's obviously in Latin. The priest is facing east, which usually means he has his back towards the assembly.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's different. Um, but I don't. There's some people. It's a very minor group, but very vocal, who believe that the Tridentine Mass is better than the Novus Ordo, and some of them unfortunately believe the Novus Ordo is no Mass at all.
Hmm.
It's we were talking about the Sedevacantists and others believe that the Novus Ordo was a mistake. That's the Vatican II was a mistake. That's unfortunate. Francis seems to be trying to curtail the celebration of the Latin Mass, and I think it has partly to do with that type of
Hmm.
division. He's trying to curtail that division, trying to heal that separation that exists. Um, I have no problem with there being two forms being celebrated, but being mutually respectful of one another.
Hmm.
I think it's beautiful, and if people were grew up, older individuals that grew up with the Latin Mass and they want to celebrate it in Latin, that's fantastic. Even priests, that were ordained with the Latin Mass, they would want to continue to celebrate the Latin Mass. I think that's fantastic.
Hmm.
But people like me that were born and know the Novus Ordo as their Mass, they should be able to celebrate it.
Hmm.
I don't see any problem having both at the same time, but it seems like um, Pope Francis wants to suppress somewhat the Tridentine Mass.
Hmm. So speaking to that a little bit, and we won't go very far down this road, but I know one of the critiques that tends to be against the Novus Ordo was that it doesn't seem very reverent at all. And I'm just curious, in your a little over 500 pages of work, have you found that to be the case, or have you found the Novus Ordo, um, in some cases at least, to be a very reverent form of the Mass?
I think they both can be reverent and they both can be irreverent. It depends really on. I think it has to come down with catechesis.
Hmm.
I've been to the Novus Ordo Mass. I live in Miami. Miami's a tropical place. You would see people go to Mass dressed like if they were going to the beach in flip flops and shorts and tank tops, and you're like, that's not that hurts a little bit.
Hmm.
You're like, I would do things differently. And you see people, coming up to communion so nonchalant, like not even trying to put out their hand in a respectful way, or
Hmm.
walking, slouching back to their seats and not even kneeling down, just sitting down, like if they just received, uh, a piece of candy or something, and
Yeah.
it's partly our fault. Our catechesis, like we had talked about, ends at confirmation, and there's nothing for you until you get married,
Hmm.
unless you go look for it. There is catechesis, there is formation, there's all sorts of, parishes are very vibrant. They have all sorts of uh, Emmaus groups and Knights of Columbus and prayer groups and Bible studies and all these things, but you have to go after them. You have to go and engage them. They're not coming for you. They're not going to knock on your door.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that it has a lot to do with catechesis, and that's the origin of the irreverence is catechetical in nature, in my opinion. And I'm
Hmm.
trying to stem the tide of that irreverence by trying to inject some knowledge in people.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it'll affect some people for sure, and I'll pray that its influence spreads, because this would be a great tool to use to get people more informed about what everything's about. So if that was your goal, it seems that the book would deliver on that goal as long as people take advantage of it.
But again, they have to go out and purposefully
Hmm.
get the book and read it. And I mean, it'll look great on the shelf, but I wish it wouldn't be on your shelf. I wish you'd read the book,
Yeah.
because it's gonna change the way that you worship. The book has 43 chapters, and
Wow.
the way that I would approach the book is that I would read one chapter a week with by yourself or with a study group or with your spouse or with your children. It's not written at a child level. I would
Hmm.
say it's a high school and a adult level. um, but you can still read it with children, read it to them, and have a discussion. I would just read one chapter a week. At the end of each chapter there's review questions, and
Hmm.
then there's three questions for reflection and group discussion. I would go through those questions and then see how what you read affects the way that you worship on Sunday. Did you
Hmm.
learn something new? Do you see now that the entrance procession is a little different now because you've read the first chapter and you understand that a little bit better? Do you understand now what the words of consecration are? Do you know the different Eucharistic prayers and why are they different and where did they come from? And why would a priest choose one over the other? and which one is longer, which one is shorter. All these, all these little nuances
Mhm.
in the mass that after reading the book, you'll be able to appreciate it, and you'll see how it impacts the way that you were. I wouldn't sit down and read it cover to cover unless you want to,
Mhm.
but I would just take it one chapter at a time. And over the course of 1 year, you'll, 43 chapters, you'll have a few off for vacation, and, a few weeks off for vacation and other things. But within the
Mhm.
course of a year, you can read through it and just see how it impacts your worship. That way, it's not a big burden on you that you have to read this 500 and some odd page tome,
Mhm.
but you can just take it one chapter at a time.
Wow. Yeah, that's a brilliant way to form it, actually. I know in my diocese, the last year, the bishop has been doing like a weekly challenge or inspiration for people. And a big part of it is, to practice something during the Mass this next week. So I love that approach of, hey, here's something new about the Mass you can learn. And, at the next Mass, see if you notice it, see if it affects the way that you, uh, sort of, um, oh my goodness,
Participate.
participate. Thank you. I totally
Mhm.
blanked on the word. But see how like you participate and engage in the Mass. I love that idea. Uh,
Well,
so,
we're being called to that. There's
mhm,
the National Eucharistic Congress that's happening.
yeah.
It's a call for us to rekindle our understanding of the Eucharist,
Hmm.
rekindle our understanding of the Mass. And I think it's no, August, September, no, June or July. I think is when it happens. The culmination of the National Eucharistic Congress. Um, and there's just a calling for us to know more about the Mass, to
Hmm.
know more about the Eucharist. Some of those statistics are just appalling about how few Catholics believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist.
Hmm.
That they believe that it's just a symbol, that it's not anything, real, and it just has to do with catechesis. You couldn't leave if you knew the church, you couldn't leave. If you
Hmm.
knew what the Eucharist was, you could just say, the words of Peter, to whom shall we go?
Yeah.
What else is there? If this is not real, what else is there? What do you have?
Hmm. Yeah. So who knew 30 years ago when you started this, this would be the culmination of it during this time?
Exactly. I knew that it was coming 30 years ago, and I said, let me just start writing it this year in 1993, and I'll just make it.
Yeah. Before email, before phone. Well, no,
For
1993.
everything.
There was some email, I think, but yeah. Wow. So speaking of time, when could people expect to receive the book if they order it?
Um, I didn't know too much about Kickstarter
Mhm.
before I decided to go on it. I never backed a project. I heard what Kickstarter was, but I wasn't too well informed about it. So before I started considering a Kickstarter campaign, I went to YouTube University and I binge watched every single thing I can about Kickstarter. And one of their biggest warnings is fulfillment.
Hmm.
When you declare a date for fulfillment, add 2 months to it, just because things might happen along the way that you don't anticipate. The paper that the printer has to order paper. What happens if there's, a strike, or
Hmm.
there's a shortage of paper, or getting it over here, something happens. You never know. The truck gets a flat tire and it delays it, whatever. So hopefully, I'll be distributing the books by June. But on the website and on the Kickstarter campaign, I'm saying August,
Okay.
just in
Wow.
case.
Yeah.
So
So
I'm
just
fingers
around
crossed.
the Yeah, so just
Yeah.
around the conference, right?
Yeah, the Eucharistic Congress. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping for June, but I'm announcing publicly August, just to give me that buffer in case something does happen. But I'll be keeping everybody informed about every step of the way, just like I did at the beginning, that I would be sending out these updates leading up to the launch of the Kickstarter campaign. Once
Mhm.
the Kickstarter campaign is over in 15 days, I'll be informing everybody about what's happening at the printer. Hey, the paper arrived. Hey, we're on press. Hey, here's a video of, the first book's coming off the press. Hey, here's a pallets getting loaded. I want to keep everybody informed
Mhm.
about what's happening in the entire journey. I don't want to hold anything back from them, because people have really come out to my party
Hmm.
that I've been preparing for 30 years, and they didn't disappoint, and I don't want to disappoint them.
Mhm. So how can people sign up if they're not already signed up to receive these updates?
The best thing to be it would do is to go to massexplained.com. That's my website, massexplained.com. And there you'll see a video of the book. You'll see uh, some reviews from Mike Acalina and Pat Madrid and my Archbishop, who wrote some nice words about the book. You'll get just more information about the book. And all over the place, there's buttons that say pre-order on Kickstarter. And then once they click on that button, it'll take them to the Kickstarter page where they can pre-order the book. I always say pre-order, not order the book, because it's not going to be delivered to your house via Amazon Prime tomorrow. You're not buying something that currently um, exists. You're
Hmm.
pre-ordering. You're reserving your copy of a book that is yet to be printed. However, I have the book in my hand right now. So it does exist. It's not. Oh, and there's the back cover, and there is. I got my hand on it. There's Mike Acalina and Patrick Madrid on the back cover.
Oh,
Um, so yeah, August is when you can expect it, but hopefully
okay.
a couple months beforehand. And oh yeah, and they go to Mass Explained, and Mass Explained is my website. I also have a blog on there. I also blog about liturgical topics. So
Hmm.
if you go to the top, you'll see some blogs where I write about liturgical things about me and my family and the way that we worship, things that have happened to us. Um, because the Kickstarter URL is a long URL. It's kickstarter.com/Dan Gonzalez/blah, blah, blah. It gets a little dicey. So that's
Oh,
why I
sure.
just point people to massexplained.com and they can click the button and that'll jump them over to the Kickstarter page.
Very good. So before we kind of wrap things up, I did have one question, and
Mhm.
that is throughout this whole 30-year process of the research, then putting the book together, is there anything in particular or a couple things that stand out to you that you've learned or that you experienced that just have sort of stuck with you?
There's some things that I've learned, those little tidbits on the mass, that there's so many of them that I've put them in the book. But really, what has floored me is the kindness of strangers. I mean,
Hmm.
you've heard that saying said so many times, but uh, there's this lady at our cathedral here in Miami that has been, she just head over heels. Anything that I needed, she'll do it. Another lady at my own parish is just contacting everybody that she can in her Rolodex to get them excited about this project. The editor at the Arkansas Catholic, she's doing everything that she can in her power to help me bring this book to life. And there's just so many different. And my acknowledgments page goes on for 2 pages of just thanking people for their generosity,
Hmm.
for lending their talents and their time and their treasure to this book. And to me, that's been one of the most impactful things, aside from learning about the mass, is just dealing with people that genuinely believe in this book, believe in my vision for the book, and believe that liturgical catechesis will stem the tide of people abandoning the faith of their
Hmm.
childhood. um, like I said at the beginning, I was at that fork on the road. Do I go left or do I go right? And I think that if I had a stronger liturgical catechesis, that question wouldn't come up.
Hmm.
So, especially nowadays, kids going to college, the, the teaching in in institutions of higher learning are telling our children that religion is irrelevant.
Hmm.
Religion is holding you back from being your true self. Religion needs to be conquered in order for you to be who you are,
Hmm.
and nothing could be further from the truth. This is what will save us,
Hmm.
not this book. I mean, Christ and His church, not this particular book.
Right.
Is okay.
Yeah, you
Just
don't want
want
to
to clarify
oversell
that. Yeah, yeah.
it.
I gotta temper expectations here.
Yeah. 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 Well, thank you for sharing that.
No
So
problem.
before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to share about this book or about anything else?
No, that's it. I thank you so much for your opening prayer. That this book will touch people, that it will touch hearts, that it will change people's attitudes towards the mass. That it's not just something that you do to check off a box. That it's not just an obligation that you have to trudge through. That you don't choose the mass because this priest gives the shortest homily and we'll get out of there, really quick. but that you actually actively participate, in the words of Sacrosanctum Concilium in Vatican II, that we have active participation in the
Mm,
Mass, that we consciously celebrate the liturgy, understanding what's happening, that we're offering ourselves, that it's our lives that are on the altar. We're presenting ourselves, we're uniting our sacrifice to Christ, and we're presenting that to the Father.
mm.
And with that understanding, gosh, the Mass becomes amazing. And I just want to get that enthusiasm across to your listeners, that the mass is beauty. It's
Yeah.
the most beautiful thing this side of heaven.
Yeah. Amen. Well, thank you, Dan, for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your project with us and the last 30 years of your life. Thank you for giving that for this. For
No,
those watching this, yeah.
thank you for
I,
letting me talk to your audience.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm happy to have you. And for anyone curious, I'll put links to all this down below in the description. In the meantime, go support Dan, buy the book, or I should say, pre order the book. Sorry. Back the Kickstarter project, follow everything that's going on. Get excited about this. Dan, again, thank you so much for joining and for sharing this. I'm really looking forward to following this project and seeing how far it's going to go because I feel like there's going to be a lot of really great things happening from this. So,
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
yeah. Thank you and take care.
Bye bye.